Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at how technology impacts criminal justice. Before we get started, a quick thank you to Neximo, our sponsor. Neximo provides developers with APIs for voice, SMS, and a lot of really interesting functionality to sort of add some connectivity to your projects. To see more about their products, check out neximo.com. Or, if you wanted to say thank you for them sponsoring the Pursuit Podcast, find them on Twitter at @NeximoDev. I'm your host, Jessica Rose. I'm here today with
Priscilla Guo.
Priscilla, what do you do?
I just graduated from Harvard and I'm pursuing my master's at Oxford this year.
Was that incredibly casual? You're like, I'm just going from Harvard to Oxford.
Just to skip across the pond.
Just a little thing. And we're actually here to talk about some very specific research you've done. Can you talk to me a little bit about your work with justice algorithms?
Sure. So at Harvard, I made my own concentration. It's called Technology, Policy, and Society. And this thesis is really the culmination of all of my research that I've done at Harvard. It's about risk assessment algorithms in the criminal justice system, which I think is an incredibly relevant and important and timely topic to be considering in today's day and age as we continue to implement technology and algorithms in our daily lives.
Fantastic. For folks who might not be familiar, what do you mean by justice algorithms? What are these algorithms being used for?
So these algorithms are being used in the pretrial, sentencing, and parole context in the criminal justice system. So essentially, the algorithms that I focused on were on sentencing, and they predict a person's likelihood to recidivate or commit a crime again.
This is feeling very sci-fi. You're telling me that the justice system in the U.S., so judges in the U.S., are relying on algorithms to tell them how long to put people in jail for?
Right. Yeah. It's very Minority Report. But nothing new, truly.
Oh, great. So stuff has been wrong for a while. But these algorithms could do a fantastic job. Are you here to tell me these algorithms do a fantastic job?
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they're all open source and really carefully vetted?
No.
There's got to be some reason.
Well, I wish.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about maybe why judges or our justice system might want to be using these?
I think it has these deep historical roots in quantifying the human self and in quantifying human nature. You mentioned sci-fi, and it's something that's definitely come up as a theme of determining what exactly is the nature of man and how subject are we to free will and predetermination, and how well can we basically predict our futures. So this trend towards risk assessment algorithms is nothing new. In the 1980s, there was actually a movement in the criminal justice system called Selective Incapacitation theory. And under that movement, the idea was that if you incapacitate or take out the most dangerous criminals in society, then the crux of all crime would essentially be eliminated, because these select few individuals are the ones that are aggravating and, spreading crime throughout the system. And it was sort of thought about in that way because, first of all, there was a lot of prison overcrowding, and so they wanted to reduce the number of people that were actually in prison in the 1980s. And secondly, there's just this idea that if you could take away the most dangerous people in society, then there would be this ultimate good in society that wouldn't really manifest itself if you followed other criminal justice theories. This early experimentation was very, to be expected, but that was quickly invalidated as a theory.
Okay.
There was this infamous RAND study in 1982 or 1984. I forget the exact date, but the study essentially said that, even though there is this predictive nature to the way that we're approaching trying to find these dangerous individuals, we cannot in good faith recommend this system because there's the generation of false positives.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
This far future sci-fi Minority Report isn't something new. It's stuff we've tried before.
Yes, it is. In fact, most people don't realize that these algorithms have been around for a while. The first one was used in 1994 by the state of Virginia.
At the state of Virginia, well known for having incredibly equal access to justice. So can you talk to me a little bit about maybe where these algorithms come from? Who builds these and in what contexts?
The other thing I would say to keep in mind on the back end is also this idea that you want to create you just mentioned justice and equality and, fairness.
Yeah.
How people want to keep those in mind when they create these policies. And along the same veins and trends of, minimum sentencing guidelines, people want to standardize justice. And a lot of people view algorithms as a way to standardize the justice process because of the variability that you would get with human input on the judicial side. But in fact, what it does is harm people more than it helps them, if that makes any sense, in the way that it standardizes, because one size does not fit all. And statistical generalizations certainly do not define human beings or individuals and individualized sentencing.
And it's got to be really tempting for judges as well to say, oh, I'm going to use this cold, logical, unbiased computer thing, and it will spit out the right answer for me.
Right. So all these, the big thing to also realize with all of these algorithms, you asked where do they come from, is that they're incredibly different. The landscape of risk assessment algorithms in the criminal justice system is incredibly diverse, from what's being used state by state to whether states are creating the algorithms or corporations are creating them and states are contracting these corporations to use the algorithms. There's a variability in what kinds of inputs go in, and there's this information obfuscation of what kinds of outputs are coming out.
I think what has to be a real challenge is that the end users, the justices or the judges or the systems, I would imagine, are not necessarily folks who have always a fantastic grasp of what an algorithm means and what biased data might look like.
Right. There's this historical struggle of technical expertise in the legal community. I think there is a growing awareness and, growing trend in the interdisciplinary study now. There's even one judge in San Francisco that taught himself how to code.
Yeah.
But the outputs of these algorithms are incredibly varied, from, -7 to 1.5. Like, what do you make of these numbers or scores, high risk, low risk, that comes out that is so different based on which algorithm and in which context it's being used, that you give it to a judge and it's hard to say that it doesn't already bias their decisions. Although this was recently challenged in a case called Wisconsin versus Loomis in 2016 with the constitutionality of using.
So this was a question I was going to bring up, is we've got a lot of rules about what you can use in court, what kind of evidence is okay, what kind of arguments are okay, a lot of procedure. I was going to ask what the rules are, if any, against using these kinds of algorithms.
It's really undefined. So Wisconsin versus Loomis is the first that actually tackles the use of these algorithms in the criminal justice context, in the sentencing process. The TLDR of the case is that Eric Loomis pled guilty to 2 counts of fleeing the police and driving a stolen car. And then the COMPAS algorithm was used in the state of Wisconsin to assign him a high-risk score for pretrial recidivism, general recidivism, and violent recidivism. So Loomis appealed his score because he asserted that his due process rights were violated because A, the proprietary nature of COMPAS prevents a defendant from challenging the accuracy and scientific validity of the risk assessment, and B, COMPAS assessments take gender and race into account in formulating the risk assessments.
Wait, what? That's interesting. Not good interesting, but
Yeah, so the way that these inputs are collected for the algorithm are all really varied, but in Loomis's case, he completed a questionnaire and provided public records that were then used to be put into the COMPAS algorithm. And so there was like a previous precedent in 1989 in State versus Scaff that asserted that defendants had the right to be sentenced based on accurate information. And since he provided his own information, the court found that on the first assertion or the first contention that Loomis brought forward, which is that the defendant isn't able to challenge the accuracy of the information, he was given all rights in doing that because he self-provided the information. On that point, he lost. On the second point, he also lost because the court found that the risk assessment score was not the only or the determinative factor in his sentencing decision. Those two keywords essentially make up the idea that this score is not the only thing being considered, and thus it is not violating his right to an individualized sentence.
That feels pretty Weasley.
Yeah, it's treated as one piece of information in like in the whole story, I guess.
So can you talk to me a bit about the research you did?
Mm-hmm. Recently, there's been a lot of media coverage over my thesis because of the nature of the claims of how ubiquitous these algorithms are. That's part of the research that I did for my thesis. But again, because this is a culmination of my interdisciplinary self-made concentration, I attempted to look at all of the critical limitations on ethical, mathematical, technical, legal dimensions, and then synthesize that into some kind of a remedy, some kind of a recommendation as to what should be done in this situation. So my main thesis argument is advocating for a right to technological due process in the context of sentencing algorithms.
That's very exciting. How would you define that? If I said, do you know what, I demand or I deserve or I should have technological due process, what do you think technological due process would look like?
I think that it should include three things. First, a right to audit trails within technological decisions, which is something that comes up very often about how exactly does this algorithm make a decision about something. Second, I think it incorporates a right to challenge the algorithmic inputs and outputs that, the algorithm produces, which is something that is very essential to our idea of due process in this country. The ability to challenge information, it seems simply a fundamental right, especially one that quantifies a human being's capacity to commit crime. And then third, a guarantee of mandated testing by law enforcement on an algorithm's accuracy, validity, and discrimination.
Wait a second. But that's obviously something that people who build these algorithms and people who use these algorithms, there must be this kind of quality control.
You would think.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't think that one of our first podcasts with a very, very heavy-hitting academic would leave me so deeply in despair.
Yeah, so...
You'd be like, academia, give up on everything.
Well, actually, this is something that one of the professors that I've done research with at Harvard, Professor Jonathan Zittrine, gave this really fantastic lecture called the Bellwether Lecture at Oxford. And it sort of speaks to what is the role of academia and how do we break down this ivory tower that all research comes through and how does it actually reach the public. I think that taking that in mind, I want this research to sort of be revelatory in changing people's minds about how we look at criminal justice now and not be complacent with the way that things are, actually fitting technology into our society without just moving fast and breaking things, but actually making things that work with our values of, fairness, justice.
Beautiful, useful, and just.
Precisely. You asked about whether there is this testing, the third prong of the definition of technological due process that I offer, which is very much based in research that Professor Danielle Keats-Citron has already done, but hers is more on automated decision-making at large. I specifically looked at the sentencing context because I think there are a lot of nuances that must be considered, especially as sentencing is thought about in the American criminal justice system. So validity testing, hardly done. That's one.
Oh, sorry. It took me an extra second to process. You said hardly done.
Yep.
That's not great. Okay.
Yeah, it's really problematic. Essentially, I'm looking back on my research now, validity testing in this situation refers to how well an assessment instrument or test actually measures the thing it's supposed to be measuring. And so it looks at the accuracy of recidivism rates. It looks at the number of false positives, the number of false negatives.
Are many of them doing any kind of testing?
Hardly. So, yeah, because there's no rule that they have to. And it takes a lot of resources to do so. I mean, you need to have people who are dedicated to this issue in order to check up on their accuracy. Obviously, this is, if you were thinking about how important this issue is, you would want to dedicate the resources to it. But at the moment, it's not being prioritized because there isn't a lot of public awareness about its use.
But these algorithms can't be used for death penalty cases, for example.
No. So the algorithms are used as recommendations. Essentially, what they say is that they synthesize information and then provide a recommendation just as a judge would if they were looking at the information, a seasoned judge. What's ultimately happening, and this is a growing trend throughout all of these technological innovations, is that decisions are being transferred from the people that we elect, the people that we put into positions of political power, to the people who create technology. And so the technology designers become ultimately the people who make a lot of decisions, the decision makers in society, which is an interesting shift that a lot of people aren't really paying attention to because it's happening in the back end of an algorithm.
So this conversation has just been an emotional roller coaster. I've been concerned, and then scared, and then angry, and then gently hopeful.
Well, yeah. While I was doing my thesis, it was difficult to contextualize the importance of what I was doing until I visited a prison. This is what I write in my foreword about how I basically attached all of the consequences that I had seen in person because I had never really had the, impetus, luckily, to go visit a prison. I never thanked, my fortunes that I didn't. But if we're moving towards a society that focuses on the enumeration of humans, then how do we keep in mind man itself as we make these algorithms? And I think that a lot of the programmers who write these algorithms or, make these focus on statistical generalizations have probably never even visited a prison. And so they've just begun to encode judgment without that consideration, which I think is incredibly important.
This is massively interesting. Is there some place that someone could go to either read some of your thesis or read a little bit more about it?
So I'm in the process of publishing, but I have written a white paper with two other colleagues previously through the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. And it's sort of just like a basic primer on this entire issue. My thesis goes more in depth on the different dimensions of the limitations that my thesis encounters, and then again the argument that I make for a technological due process. But yeah, you can first look at that white paper, and hopefully this will be out soon so that more of the public will know about it.
And something I wanted to touch on, which I hope isn't too embarrassing, I wanted to reiterate that you did this research. You did this incredibly in-depth research. You went out of your way. You went to prisons to talk to people who were impacted by this. You did all of this as an undergraduate.
Well, I think that there were a lot of fortunate turns in my undergraduate career that led me to this path of, looking at fairness and justice from this technological standpoint. I made my own concentration, and it was because I wasn't satisfied just being within one discipline. I felt as though the move today was to look at a more interdisciplinary perspective on research on, things that matter in society. And I took a class at Harvard Law School under Professor Susan Crawford and Wade Warner called Responsive Communities, and ultimately ended up being a teaching assistant for that class. But it really pushed me towards the direction of this research in cultivating this positive environment and having an advisor. My advisor was Professor LaTanya Sweeney, who I don't know if you have ever heard of her, but she's the most incredible researcher that I have ever met, just as impassioned about certain issues that really affect people at a fundamental level, their data and how it comes to define people, injustices, on racial bias, on algorithmic encodings that really tend to take advantage of these statistical generalizations that mean nothing to how an individual operates. Yeah, she's done incredible research, and she really guided me on this thesis, and has being in the middle between, well, the law school and the engineering school are connected by one quadrangle, but most people don't really intersect between, just bouncing between there and then going to the Berkman Klein Center for my home. It was really a process where, a place, an environment in which I could thrive with my research. So yeah, and I also, part of it was funded through Professor Sweeney's Technology Science Journal, and then also partially funded through the Arthur Lyman Law Fellowship for Public Service. And I don't know if you know who Arthur Lyman is.
I don't.
Really famous lawyer who has done a lot for public service, who has said stuff like, public service should be as natural as to a lawyer as breathing. And he has this one line that really struck me and sort of pushed me to go visit prisons and study this. Was he said, though I'd prosecuted men who'd gone to prison, I'd never actually been inside one until that day. And this is in regards to the Attica incident in upstate New York. Yeah, basically he was the lead special investigator on that issue, trying to keep a fair eye on why exactly the prison riot had occurred and what was the sobering reality of the carceral state.
So this is all exciting and interesting and sobering.
Yeah.
I'd like to look at something a little bit lighter for just a moment, which is, can you tell me what you're going to be doing next? I'm going to be so excited to see what you do next. No pressure.
Research-wise, or, well, I know what I'm studying, but
yeah.
My master's program at Oxford is called The Social Science of the Internet, and I'm really excited because the Oxford Internet Institute is sort of an unparalleled research facility that actually has academic tracks associated with the research they do. So I will be looking specifically at algorithms and artificial intelligence, along which veins I haven't exactly decided what my dissertation will be focused on. At the moment, I'm actually interning at NASA JPL, which is just like my own.
What?
It's just a personal.
You've done so much cool stuff that you just cruise by. Did you say NASA?
Yeah.
Did you say NASA real casual?
It's a cool space.
Wop, 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 wop.
Yep. I'm also really into puns, so.
I would like to thank you for one of the best cited episodes of the Pursuit podcast we've ever run. If somebody wants to see more of your work or see more of what you do, is there anywhere they can follow you online?
I have a Twitter, and I tend to tweet things that I write about. I'm actually working on an article with the Harvard Law School Journal of Law and Technology on memes and copyright attribution. So,
Are you just extremely cool all the time?
A lot of fun stuff. I mean, everyone loves memes, and I think this article is focused on how to make sure that memes stay what we're using them as today, which is a conversation mechanism. A lot of major corporations have started to purchase and own the rights to memes to prevent.
Wait, you what?
Yeah. So, for example, Socially Awkward Penguin. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's a meme.
I have seen Socially Awkward Penguin. Who owns Socially Awkward Penguin?
National Geographic.
I've made a sincere effort not to swear on this podcast, but you what?
Yeah, and Nyan Cat is owned by Sony.
I need to go and have a think about this new information and what it means to my life.
Right. Well, I guess basically I propose using blockchain to essentially address the concerns that people have with creating memes. Like in the same way that you create art, you want to copyright your art because you are, proud of it and it is your individual creation. You want to encourage people to continue to create more art. But memes are a special case in that people are making these creations, but they mostly function as a conversation mechanism where culture gets remixed and repurposed. You take an existing image and then you slap text or whatever, like additionally Photoshop it or add something of your own flavor to it. Having this restrictive environment in which companies can own memes and then sue you if you use it doesn't seem exactly like the right way to be going about it. But if we could attribute memes to certain creators, like follow the history of a meme, especially as an academic, I would love to follow the history of a meme. If you could attribute it as a blockchain,
Well, that and the street cred, like you would absolutely be able to say, I did this first.
Yeah. I mean, and then I remixed it in such way. So I don't know. That's what I've been working on.
This is fantastic. And what was your Twitter, just so all of us can keep up with the ins and out of legal memes?
My Twitter is Priscilla, PriscillaWguo.
Fantastic.
It's just my full name, not very creative.
But once we get that, we can also Google for more of your work. Priscilla, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the podcast. If you want to check out the sketch notes and promotional art to accompany this episode, find us on Twitter at @PursuitPod. Next episode, we're going to have a really interesting guest coming on to talk to us about learning functional programming. We hope to see you then.